Hello and welcome to The Cure with Dr. Cutter. I am your host today and I'm delighted that you joined us. Here we are focusing on ways that you can empower yourself, heal yourself, help yourself. Medicine has a great contribution to your health, but a lot of it depends on you. So we're going to be dealing with topics and strategies that help you to heal yourself. So how well are you? One of the key components of health and wellness is your mental health. We've all heard of the Me Too movement and what it represents. We'll talk about that in more detail, but I'd like to introduce to you Quiana Bush. She has a wonderful history and record in terms of mental health. She has worked in the Veterans Administration system and is currently working with a governmental capacity now. She has dealt with all age groups, and I love the fact that she has worked with adults as well as children. She's been educated on the East Coast as well as the West Coast, so she has a really broad perspective. So welcome today. I'm so glad that you're with us, and we're going to have a lot to talk about. Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Thank you for having me. I'm ready to go.
So, the Me Too movement has really had a lot of traction, I would say, over the past year. And I took a look at where the origin is. It actually was originated by a woman, I think back in 2006. And it wasn't until one of the actors started putting this on Twitter that it really took off. I mean, I think there was somewhere in the neighborhood of, 23 million tweets using Me Too within a week span, right after that time. So this has really become front and center. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what the Me Too movement means to you as a mental health professional?
Absolutely. The Me Too health movement is phenomenal right now. It is because oftentimes women who have been sexually assaulted are experiencing a lot of shame, self-doubt, and anger. And so the Me Too movement is actually giving women the opportunity to move from the victimization to empowerment.
I love that. And, I'd like for us to kind of move a little bit off of some of this languaging with victim,
Yes.
Because I believe that things can happen to us, right? But it's not what happens to us, it's what we do next, right? And there's those
Absolutely.
phrases that we hear, falling forward and all of those things. So I'd like for us to talk a lot today about what people can do from here. So, I'm going to tell you an interesting story, and, let me know what you think that we should have done. So I was at a dinner party recently, and someone at the dinner table revealed to us that they had been raped. And everyone was quiet for about 10, maybe 15 seconds, and the conversation just went on from there. And I got the feeling that nobody really felt like they were in a position to say anything or do anything, so we didn't really do anything with it. And my thought was, well, I will pull this person aside later and we'll talk about it. How do we deal with people, friends, families, people that we love, even strangers, when they admit to us that they've had some type of situation that coincides with the Me Too movement?
Absolutely. Well, for one, I like to say I think it's wonderful that you pulled her to the side. The fact that the survivor, we'll call her a survivor because that's what she is.
Love that.
The fact that she disclosed this, she felt obviously safe enough to disclose this to a group of people. You going to her and talking with her about it was a step in the right direction. What people can do in general is really let that person know, that loved one or friend or stranger, that it's not their fault, and that, really listen to them. Show compassion initially, and then you can take a look at whether or not have you contacted the police.
Okay.
That would be something that I would definitely suggest. And then from the legal piece, move into going to see a primary care physician. I mean, once you go and report that to the police, they have steps in place. We're talking about rape kits and things like that,
right,
to make sure that the person is okay physically.
And interestingly enough, I believe that this is bringing up a lot from people's past. I mean, this woman, this happened to her probably about 40 years ago. And she's since been married, she's had children and all that. So it's one thing when it's fresh, but it's another thing when you've been carrying this inside of you for all of these years. And now that it seems permissible for this to come out, I think that the person sometimes is left with, well, what do I do now? How do I heal myself? So what can that person do
Absolutely.
for themselves?
Absolutely. So we're talking about a trauma. It is a trauma. And it's really at this point for that situation that you just described about awareness and becoming aware of, am I experiencing any symptoms? Am I sleeping? Do I have nightmares? Am I on edge? Do I feel like I'm not safe in a certain environment? You start to pay attention. How often am I feeling these things? Is it seasonal? Is it a smell that I get that's starting to remind me?
Ooh, triggers.
That's exactly what it is.
Interesting.
Once you notice what those triggers are, the question then becomes, are you not feeling safe? What do you do with it? So everyone is different. I like to call it an individualized self-care plan.
Okay.
When someone comes to me, I don't
like
say
that.
treatment. This is your individual self-care plan. We can both experience a trauma, but our symptoms may be very different. What works for me in terms of managing and de-escalating may be different for someone else. So for this person, it very well may be listening to music, mindfulness. If they're not opposed to therapy, some people are afraid of that.
Sure.
But therapy can be a great place, a safe environment where you can go and start to talk about what you're experiencing and what can work for you to manage those symptoms.
Do you recommend that people confide, in their loved ones? So, for example, if she's married or has children, maybe even adult children, does she go and tell them, hey, I want to inform you this happened? Is that an important part of moving forward, is disclosure? Or is a disclosure really something that's very personal, and if she feels like she wants to keep it a secret, it won't hurt her? I mean, what is your thought about the secrecy part of it?
What I feel is, though, I think that people handle things differently, but I do think there is power in a survivor telling their story when they're ready. Not us forcing the survivor to come out with it. It's when they feel ready. For instance, when you were out at this dinner party and this person decided to disclose this, at that point she was ready to disclose that. So if she feels comfortable enough to speak with her husband, to speak with family members, the more support that a survivor can get, the better. And if she wants to go deeper, I'm always a proponent in therapy. Going in there, because there's certain things that your loved one and family members may not be trained in clinically that may be able to help you with that healing process.
Now, we talk a lot about, what's happening with the women, but
Yes.
I also realize that there are some men who have had this type of experience,
Yes.
Either by religious leaders, coaches, and I think, coaches also impact, the young girls as well.
Yes.
But all of these individuals now that are adults dealing with this childhood issue, and especially as a man, what are some ways that a man's experience with discussing this is different than a woman's?
Yes, absolutely it is, because society has roles, these constructs that we're supposed to follow, right? These, which aren't necessarily the case for everyone. Society views men and boys in a certain way. There are men and boys who have been sexually assaulted.
Right.
And it is challenging for men, because sometimes they often feel like, what did I do to be raped or sexually assaulted? When it's not about guilt. It's not about shame. It would be them finding a good support system, finding some people like groups, like a group support, some like individuals. So it would be the same process for men, but men oftentimes feel a different kind of shame because of their role, what their role is supposed to be in society.
So the shame is common to both genders,
Absolutely.
but it just kind of manifests in different ways. And I would also imagine that maybe there's some that feel that they were weak, that they should have been able to do something about it or somehow protect themselves.
Absolutely.
And communicating that to loved ones and getting people to understand, I think sometimes can be challenging. But I really liked what you said about being able to disclose it when they're ready and doing it at the right time. I think that would probably make a difference.
Huge difference, because it's you automatically have that shame, that feel, you're second guessing, did this even happen? So to be at a place where I feel safe enough to disclose it is huge, and not forcing the person, because there's already internally a conflict.
Right. So then I'm also thinking about parents. There's a lot of parents out there that are now finding out that their children were the survivors of some type of trauma. Yes. Or that they were maybe a perpetrator of some type of trauma. So what does a parent do with all of this? How does a parent cope with this knowledge of either maybe there's some guilt, hey, I wasn't able to protect my child from this, or maybe there's some guilt about, I can't believe I raised someone who would do this to someone else. What do parents do?
That is challenging. Again, get the support that they need. Really get in and talk with someone about what that experience is, their own experience in growing up, and what sexuality means for them, what their experiences have been. Because once they're able to get the support that they need, then they're better able to support their children. It's not about taking the onus or the blame. If they didn't know,
Right.
What can you do if you don't know? Right? So I think as a parent, you want to, for the most part, protect your child. And so, it's very challenging. It can be to hear that, but there are support groups for parents as well.
And sometimes, parents will find out about these things real time.
Yes.
A daughter will come home, this happened to me, but I don't know if this ever happens, but does a son come home and say, Mom, Dad, I took advantage of a girl, and if it does, what do you do with that in the moment?
So for that particular situation, there are certain types of treatment for children that have certain sort of sexual behaviors, and treatment specifically for that, for boys and adults who have certain sexual behaviors. There's a specialty. There are therapists who specialize in that. If they're perpetrating another child, depending on the age, there's certain laws that we have to consider. Parents do have a responsibility to notify law enforcement if their child is telling them that they've been inappropriately touched in some way. If that perpetrator is possibly still living in the home, it is important for them to not only contact law enforcement, but the Department of Children and Family Services, because the responsibility is to protect the children, their safety. And if you're not in a place, well, you're going to have to be in a place, because if you don't notify the police officers, law enforcement, or the Department of Children and Family Services, if the perpetrator is still living in the home, if someone finds out that your child discloses to you as a parent and you don't act on that, your child can then possibly be removed. An investigation will begin, because the safety of the child is really the focus. It becomes the focus at that point. Now that's if the perpetrator is in the home.
Right.
If the perpetrator is not in the home, then just contacting law enforcement is sufficient.
What if the perpetrator is another child in the home? Maybe a relative that's, as a child, technically, 13, maybe a 15-year-old, and I don't know what an age difference would be, but some type of thing where they're both in the home. How does that work?
Yes. So again, safety is important. You want to focus on the safety of both children, for that matter, but especially for the child who is being sexually abused. So at that point, it would be in the best interest of the parent to contact the Department of Children and Family Services, get some sort of referrals from them, let them know what's going on, get referrals from them, and some guidance on how we as a family can deal with this issue.
Interesting. Let's shift gears a little bit, and we're getting close to the holiday season, right? Thanksgiving is coming up, Christmas is coming up, and I can see a lot of families sitting around the dinner table having conversations, debating about chief justices, the Supreme Court, about certain, producers and actors and all of those things, and I can see some of these issues coming to the forefront at the dinner table during the holidays. So here you are, you're hosting this wonderful dinner, you've cooked all day, and, pandemonium breaks loose because someone has, made this claim. How do you diffuse that? How do you turn this very difficult situation back into a family situation and then get people what they need to feel supported?
Well, that is not really an easy one.
That's tough.
That is a very tough situation you just described, and it's not going to be a one-time, we're going to be able to, sing Christmas carols if that's what you celebrate during the holiday. Yeah. If it's disclosed at a family function and pandemonium breaks out, there are going to be a variety of different things to look at. The person who has been allegedly sexually assaulted, how does that person feel? Do they feel safe? What is going on with them? So that's one thing. Really, if you're hosting a dinner like that, it would be probably in the best interest to remove those family members from the dinner table.
Both individuals,
Both individuals.
Right? Not just one or the other.
Both of them. Okay. Both of them. Because the reality is we can't control what other people do and how they feel. But in a situation like that, it would be best to not have either one of them at that family function.
And then what?
And then after that, possibly talk to both of them and try to get both of them the supports that they need if they're willing. Some people may not be willing. A family member may deny it, and another one may be very adamant about this is what happened for me. And so depending on where that family member is, then that's the way you have to, you allow them to lead. Okay. If the person is disclosing it, to me it sounds like they're ready to get some form of treatment or support. If a person is not willing to admit that these things happen, then that lets you know they're not willing to own it. So what can you do with that?
Right.
Nothing. You have to accept what is. So it just really depends on the players involved and where they're at in terms of coming forth or not.
One of the things that we're taught in medical school, that's one of our responsibilities to patients is autonomy. Making sure that we're respecting the choice of the other. And I hear a lot of that in the answers that you're giving is really respecting the autonomy of the individual and not trying to push some type of agenda or a pat answer or a solution. And I think the individuality of this is where the power is. It's really trying to at least understand and trying to connect with either the person or the perpetrator, because I think there's remorse with the perpetrators. There's a lot of fear, right? How do they come forward? What do they do now? Is it going to help anything? And then there's a lot of, I think, remorse and shame and all of those things with the person who's surviving. How do I go on with my life? It makes me also think about, people who are in situations today. They're trying to earn a livelihood. A woman works in a situation, she has someone who is an authority figure, someone who is determining her viability financially and the trajectory of her career. Yes. And there's some line that's crossed, some line that's objectionable. You want to get help, but you have to survive. How do you mitigate the kind of the challenge of trying to survive and, thrive and have a career, and also making your work environment more comfortable in that situation?
Safe. Making it safe for you. That is a very challenging one and very tricky. Yeah. Depending on where this individual works, I would suggest that people contact their HR department, and because you can use this as a preventative measure, even if it's not happening for you, just to know what policies, if any, are in place for sexual harassment. What do we have in place if this occurs? And find out what that is. They'll let you know exactly what those steps would be. Now, if your supervisor is the person that's giving you these unwanted advances, you would also find out, well, what is the step if it is my superior? Do I go to the next who is the next person in line? Who is the next person in charge? If for some reason your place of employment does not have policies and procedures in place, you can always contact the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and their job specifically, they deal with sexual harassment and discrimination, amongst other things, but for certain, those two issues, and they can give you play-by-play detail on what exactly you can do, and depending on who you speak with, they will start an investigation.
Okay. Now, I'm thinking practically. I'm thinking what happens in the interim, right? Because all of those things take time. It's a process.
Oh, yes.
So I'm thinking, okay, does this person say, look, I'm not going to go into any meetings alone with this person. I'm going to have, a coworker with me. How do you explain that to the authority figure? Do you say this person's here to take notes, or, what do you do?
Depending on the place of employment where the individual works, there already may be something in place while this investigation is going on, while I've received this grievance about your behavior. You cannot be within so many feet of this person. sometimes certain places of employment already have that in place. So once that person discloses, they go to whomever in HR and they write up their statement. It may not be HR, it may be someone else. Automatically, they may have something in place that says, you two can't be in the same room together. You can't contact this person. You can't speak with this person until this investigation is over, regardless of how long that investigation is.
So I like that you went through the process, but I'm also thinking practically, I'm thinking about a situation that I had when I was in residency. There was a resident that was junior to me who was harassed for an entire year by the chief resident. I didn't even know about it until she left, but then, the story started coming out, and what he would do is he would make advances, and she might, complain to the chief or something like that. But then he would tell everybody else in the environment that, she's making these things up and there's something wrong with her and all that. So then there's the whole stigma.
Right.
And I was wondering, was there another way that she could have handled this? Was there something else that she could have done to make it through that year? I mean, he was going to graduate at the end of the year. He would have been gone. She could have moved on, but she ended up quitting surgery as a result of it. So what other things could she do to cope or to thrive in that setting
So
in spite of him?
Yes, additional coping mechanisms. How can I deal with this situation? It's like we call that stress inoculation, right? Training. We have some of that where it basically prepares individuals for stressful situations. So if I'm a resident and I'm going to see this person is making these advances, he's basically trying to discredit what I'm saying. Now I need to figure out, okay, how can I deal with this? What am I going to do? How am I going to be prepared when I see this individual? Whether it is not being in the same classroom with them or physically staying away from that individual. If I see this person, is there a plan of escape? Is there a place on this campus where I feel safe? Is there someone there that I feel safe with who can kind of accompany me? It might not be the same person the entire time, but really coming out with a plan and a way to manage your stress just in case you do come across this individual.
I really like what you said. Part of that was having a companion, somebody to be there, but then also the plan of escape, because you don't really think about that. But, if you anticipate, okay, I have to go into this room, it's going to be just myself and this other person. How can I get out? Should I stand closer to the door? What kinds of things can I do? Because sometimes you just need to make it through a certain period of time, and then the situation is resolved,
Right.
And I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't seek help or anything like that, but you have to be realistic. Sometimes you're in a situation where you just can't get that help as soon as you need it.
Absolutely.
Or the process is going to take an amount of time where you're going to be uncomfortable for some time, and you don't want to miss your livelihood. So in the time that we have left, I also want to shift gears a little bit to the military.
Yes.
I know that there has been some issues in the military with this, and I believe the hashtag for the military is Military Me Too, and then there's a campaign that's Military Me Too Stand Down, which is basically saying, hey, we're not going to tolerate this. So that's a different situation where there's a very rigid hierarchy, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of situations, there's really not very much choice. So in, whatever experiences that you've had with the military and things like that, what can those individuals do to cope and to survive?
Yes, because we're talking about a culture, a military culture of training. For the obvious reasons, the training is to possibly go into combat, which is very serious. And so we're talking about chains of command and power, right? This hierarchy that you're talking about. And so there are about 232 vet centers and these are for veterans who've been deployed and are coming back, who have dealt with, they call it MST, military sexual trauma. There are specific modalities of treatment for military men and women who have been sexually assaulted. Also the VA or the regular VA centers also offer MST training and therapies for our military men and women. It's not easy for them to come out with it because of the hierarchy, but there are a ton of resources available.
Well, I really love the fact that you have had this broad breadth of experience, because you've not only been able to tell us about what do adults do when they've been in a situation in the past as children, what do adults do when they're in a situation that they're in now, but also what to do in terms of parents and children and all of those things. I just want to encourage everyone to get into dialogue, to talk with people that you love and trust, and to not be silent. This is an important issue, and there's two sides to it. We want to help the perpetrators too, because we don't want it to happen again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. We appreciate you.